Welcome into the Barbecue Life. I'm your host, Kurt Mueller. We're powered by Hound Hogs BBQ Supply. Check them out on Facebook and Instagram at Hound Hogs BBQ Supply. Great folks, both Blake and Zach do great things for the competition barbecue community. So we are continuing our series here talking about the judge seating program as it relates to the Kansas City Barbecue Society, or KCBS. And I'm excited to welcome in Mr. Mark Gibbs. He is out of Fawn Grove, Pennsylvania. He is with Checkered Flag 500 Barbecue. Mark, thanks for joining us. Welcome.
Good to be here, Kurt. Thanks a lot for inviting me.
Absolutely. We're glad to be here. And again, for our listeners, this is part of a series that we are doing. We're chatting with cook teams, we're chatting with reps, we're chatting with judges. Mark has been competing for a long, long time. I think he has done to the tune of 170 KCBS competitions. So he has quite the resume there, and he's been involved in competition barbecue for a long, long time. I'm always curious about the journey into this because it is a crazy sport. You know, it seems like you have to be a little crazy to get into competition barbecue. So I'm
And
curious, Mark, how did all this start for you? What was the journey like?
well, it started with me like it started with a lot of folks. I started in 2012, so right at the height of the barbecue pitmasters craze, and I was sitting there one day saying I could do this, I could do this, and I had an old Meadow Creek smoker, a pig roaster 60. So it was nothing fancy. That no Jambo or anything like Myron was cooking on TV or anything like that. I bought Myron Mixon's cookbook, went to a contest at Gavinell's Meats, a local place here, probably not 15 miles from me, pouring down rain. Used Myron's cookbook and just had me a good old time, met some great people. And the people's really what drew me into barbecue once I did my first one. The folks are all so nice. But I got a third place in chicken at that contest. And it has just been a whirlwind since then. We've done, like you said, we've done 170 contests. We've won 19 grands. We've got 10 or 11 reserves, and just call a whole lot of calls. But just the people that we've met over the last 10 or 12 years has just been something that's more valuable than any trophy I ever got. We've made a couple trips to the Jack, and my favorite contest were those. I don't know how long you've been around, but the old Sam's clubs. So it was a great little tour that they had, and we had a lot of success there. Never won the big one, but we won a regional. So it's just been a lot of fun. We have a good time, and the travels were great. We're winding down. So this year we've got a couple of contests still on the slate, and we're probably going to wind it down this year. It's just been a long road, and it's as you know, it's expensive, and the travel does catch up with you.
That's absolutely right. But I love what you said about the people. We hear that a lot on this show. You know, it is at the end of the day, barbecue is all about the people. Yes, we're competitors. Yes, we all want to win. Yes, it's predominantly men, and we all know that men have egos and pride. So, but at the same time, you know, when you boil it down, barbecue is all about the people. And I don't think
That's
we've
it.
had many guests on the show that don't chat about the people aspect of it. So I always think that's really cool to see that. You know, it's one thing to hear it; it's
Yeah.
another thing to actually witness it firsthand. So, you know, 11 years in, 170 competitions, likely your quote unquote farewell tour, if you will,
Yes.
coming to a close here. Curious, in those 170 competitions, what's the most memorable one that sticks out?
My first win, Sam's Club Regional in Laurel, Maryland, and caught me completely off guard. They were counting down the top 10, and I thought, I'm going to make at that time, you need to be in the top six to make it to the Bentonville for the finals. And once he got to about fifth place, I thought, I'm really good at doing the scores in my head. We all do it, right? So we all sit down and predict who's going to be where. And I thought, yeah, I'd missed this. And boy, when he called me, it still sends a chill up my spine. That first win, yeah, you never forget that one. So a lot of fun, good
That's
memories.
That's what I hear. You never forget the first win. We're still in search of that ourselves, but you gotta if you don't play, you can't win. So I know
That's
that
right. That's
much.
exactly right. So in 16 and 17, we cooked 35 contests in 16, I think, and maybe 30 in 17. And I tell you what, it tore me up. I mean, when I got to the end of 17, I was pretty worn out. I probably could have given it up then. But again, going back to the people, everybody was like, "Oh, come on, Mark, hang out. We'll have a good time." So the next year I did 10, 12. Once you start doing them, it's hard to get away from them.
That's exactly right. We hear that a lot on this show too. And I'm curious from your perspective, since you've been in it for so long, you've been part of the quote unquote glory days, for lack of a better term. When we had Pitmasters going on, and it
Sure.
was about a 2 or 3 year run. It seems like the Pitmasters was going on, and I think
Yeah.
that's widely regarded as kind of the height of competition barbecue. How do we get back there?
I don't know that you can recreate Pitmasters, the original. So even going back to the very originals, that's where they followed Myron, Tuffy, Leanne, and those folks around the circuit. That's what drew me in. I have to admit that if the later iteration where they had the three judges and had three or four teams competing against each other on a stage with all kinds of, oh, we're going to cook alligator today or something like that. That probably wouldn't have drawn me in as much.
Right.
But being able to see that competition from week to week and sort of pick a favorite, So Tuffy was always sort of my favorite guy to follow around. And it was enjoyable. If they could recreate that,
Mhm.
it would be great. Um, but one of the things, and I'm guilty of this as much as probably the next guy you talk to. I don't know what kind of a rig you cook in, but I started out with a 10 by 10 easy up and my pickup truck and a table and a chair. And you could see the people in the crowd and all that kind of good stuff. I've been through three trailers uh, with mounted cookers on the back. I use Deep South smokers, and Randall makes some of the best stuff on the market still.
Yes, he
And
does.
and I mounted one on the back of each one of my trailers and just had great success with them. But we spent time in our trailer. Yeah, I've got satellite TV inside my competition barbecue trailer. So
And I'm glad that you mentioned the humble beginnings, because I know there's a perception out there for teams that are looking to get into the sport. Sure, there's a perception out there that you have to have a 40-foot rig and satellite TV and all this other stuff. But at the end of the day, most folks start exactly like you did, with nothing more than a 10 by 10 pop-up tent, and maybe they're
yeah,
camping out,
yeah,
Uh, that's how we started. We camp out. We've got a 16-foot converted cargo trailer.
yeah,
It holds our smokers, but that's
yeah,
it. It's
yeah.
it's
That's it. I mean, folks, when I first started, folks were renting U-Hauls. I mean, I can remember the first time I met Luke Darnell from Old Virginia Smoke. He pulls up next to me in a 16-foot U-Haul with all of his stuff on it, and he's like, "Yeah, this is the way I'm going to compete." Now Luke's got a big old trailer with his Jambo on the back, and he doesn't have satellite TV. He used to come to my trailer to watch TV. So
There you go. Well, that's what we're certainly striving for, that satellite TV at some point and some AC. We'll get there one day, but love the humble beginnings. Now let's transition over to the judge seating program. Again, this is part of a series that we are doing, really doing a deep dive into the judge seating program. And the idea here is, number one, to educate listeners, to educate those that aren't familiar with it, but also to create some constructive dialogue around it, in the hopes that over the long term we're able to move the football forward, so to speak, make
Mhm.
some mutually agreeable changes that ultimately benefit barbecue for the long term. And for me, I'm new to it. I'm 39. I have two young boys, 9 and 6. They love the kids queue. I want to
Sure,
see a kids queue at every single pro competition
that'd be great.
out there. They love it, I love it. But the judge seating program, I think, is a really, really, really hot topic right now. And, this is the reason we're having this series. So I'll shut up and pass you the mic, so to speak, and let you just kind of educate and give some history behind it. And we'll go from there.
Sure, it's a hot topic for me at least twice a month. I mean, I don't see when I was out there every week. It was a hot topic. I mean, everybody would come to me and ask me questions about the seating program, or the reps would come to me and ask about the seating program. It's sort of the bane of my existence in barbecue now. There's a piece of me that says I wish I never would have done this, but I know it was for the better. I'll tell you how we got there. There was a contest in Preston, Maryland called the Boss Hog, I think is what it was. Boss Frog. The it was at an auto dealership. I had the worst cook. You know, when you cook as many contests as I have, you know when you cook bad. You
Mm.
know, we'll go around and we'll BS with each other out on the playing field after we're done cooking. Somebody says, "How was your cook?" You go, you know, so so. And then if somebody gets a call, you accuse them of being a sandbagger. Well, I had the worst cook that I've ever, even to date, the worst cook I've ever had. And sitting around with some of the folks, they were like, "How was your cook?" I said, "Horrible." So I get a couple of calls. They're counting down the top 10. They get the reserve grand champion. Well, first off, I won brisket, and I'm a pretty good brisket cook. I've won brisket 21, 22 times. So I know good brisket, and this wasn't it. I won brisket, and I was just sort of shaking my head and laughing. And then I got called reserve grand champion. When that happened, and I'm all about a level playing table. I mean, I want a fair field. I want a fair fight. When I looked at the score sheets, I picked out an angel table and a table of death that were so obvious. And just to help out with angel table and table of death, you know, for somebody that doesn't know, I mean, most of the folks listening are probably competitors, but an angel table is a group of 6 judges at a table that just think every piece of barbecue they eat is the best one they've ever eaten, and they give out high scores. The table of death is the exact opposite. It's judges that really you think you might have killed them with your barbecue. Um, so those two things can make or break you in a barbecue contest. And I missed the table of death that week, and I hit the angel table. A couple of other really good teams hit the table of death and missed the angel table, and that's how I got where I got. I hit the angel table with my brisket, and that's why I won brisket. There's no way I should have won brisket. So I'm friends with Philip Brazier, who was on the board at the time. He was on the board, and he was in charge of. I think he was in charge of reps at the time on the board. And I called him up and said, "Philip, we got to do something about this. This table of death and angel table thing is just out of hand. I mean, and you see it all across the country every week." So he said, "Well, what can you do?" And Philip's not a real. Sorry, Philip, if you're listening. Philip's not a real technical guy, and I work in a health system, and I actually do uh, statistics and data runs. That's what I do for a living. And I said, "Let me see if I can put something together, but I'm going to need your help." And I don't know what KCBS is using now for judge scoring, but they used to have what was called the score system. So I said to Philip, "Can you get me access to score?" And he said, "Sure." He said, if you know, if you think it'll help. So he got me access to all the judges' lifetime scores. And I did a monthly download of those. Did some analysis to see what we could do. And after I thought about it, and by the way, at the time, they were just sort of doing judges go seat yourself.
Mm.
What was the deal? Or the organizer would say, "Oh, I'm going to put the judges here, there, you know, wherever they wanted to." So there was a complete randomness about it as far as yeah, it was almost a chip draw because it was just go sit wherever you want. Um, so as I started to analyze the numbers and everything, I just figured the simplest way to do it was take the judges by their historic average, sort them from highest to lowest, and just count them off at tables. If there were 5 tables, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you know, and go sit at your tables and have a good day. And it distributed, and I ran some numbers, and it distributed the judges very evenly. And you know what? I'm wrong. At the time, they were actually doing it by they were seating judges by number of contests judged.
Mm.
There's not a worse category to you. You've judged 150 contests, so you go to the top of the list. I mean, just you should ask people what their favorite ice cream flavor is and seat them by that.
Right.
There's no statistical relevance to that at all. So I created a little program, presented it to Philip, and he said, "Let's sort of run a couple of samples and see what we can do. We'll run a couple of contests and see how it comes up. So we ran a few and we had a whole lot of success with it. The tables were really even when we started out, and pretty typically what would happen is we would be if we had 6 tables of judges, the difference between the highest table and the lowest table of total like average score would be about 1 point or less every time,
Mhm.
and it worked really well, and people were happy with it. There were a few reps out there and a few that sort of led the charge to get rid of the program eventually that didn't use it because they just aren't comfortable with software.
Right.
And that made for some issues. But just anybody to say that the system didn't work, I would argue with them about it because it did.
So is the I always like to look at the other side of the coin and look at, okay, what are potential downsides, what are potential objections, challenges, whatever you want to call it. I heard you mention one of them, and that is, and I understand the learning curve for some when it comes to
Sure.
technology maybe is a bit steeper than others,
Sure.
especially, those that, are over the age of 65, 70, as you get older, they, my dad's 78. So
Mhm.
he struggles sometimes with whether he's getting a text or a voicemail, or I mean an
Yep.
email. So so
I get it. I get it.
but is that the main objection that you started to hear, or were there other objections that came up?
Yeah, that was one. So that there was a technical glitch. So different reps had different computers, so they might not have had
Mm,
the same version. And just so you know, we call this a program. It is really a fancy workbook. This is built I built this as a proof of concept, and it sort of took off. So it's a Microsoft Excel workbook with a bunch of macros in it that does all the legwork. I'm pretty slick in Excel, and I always and what the plan was from Philip's perspective was to get it professionally built. And Jason Cole, do you know Jason Cole from Hot Coals?
I do not.
So yep, so he tried a little startup sanctioning body because almost because of the seating program because he was on the board and left the board, and a good part of it was because of the seating program and the board's lack of wanting to use it. So he started a sanctioning body, and I worked with him a little bit on a seating program, and he took it and had it built by a developer. I'm not a developer by trade, so had it built in a really slick little program. So and that's what KCBS should have done with it. But some of the arguments were things that would have taken the simplicity away from the seating program. They wanted to start weighting judges. So my program took the judges average all 4 meets because we don't reseat judges between meets. So we took that judges average for all 4 meets, and that's what we used as for the seating portion. Some of the talk now, and Charles might address this a little bit when you talk to him, is um, they wanted to start to weight um, categories based on historic averages for each one of the meets. I don't know that that's. I think it adds a level of complexity to it that doesn't need to be there. I wanted this to be able to be something that could be explained to you as a relatively new barbecue guy. And when I say to you, Kurt, we just take the judges, line them up by average historic score, count them off, and put them in the 10 at the tables, and we have a fair level playing field to start with. We know we have that, and there have been people that have had some ideas, and ideas are. I mean, that's what makes for improvement.
Mhm.
Um, One of the things over the years that I had thought about was, let's say you're a judge and you have 150 contests on you've been judging for 15 years. You've been judging longer than I've been in the barbecue game. It's probably not fair to include the first 100 contests that you've judged in your average, or maybe just take the last 20 that a judge has judged and see how that goes. You could sharpen the point on the pencil without overdoing it,
Right.
and I think that's a direction that they should look.
Yeah, I agree. And it to me, being undereducated about the subject, just from a common sense standpoint, if it levels the playing field and if it betters competition barbecue as a whole, which in turn attracts more teams, which attracts more sponsors, marketing dollars.
Yeah.
It all comes back together. So from my standpoint, I look at it and say, well, certainly there's a learning curve. Certainly, it can be slightly complex, but from my viewpoint, I say, well, to me, I don't. I understand there's disadvantages, just like anything in life. There's
Sure.
disadvantages, but to me, when I look at, is the juice worth the squeeze, so to speak? And to me, I look at it and say, well, there's a lot more positive than there is negative.
Yeah.
You know, um,
Absolutely.
and so I've also heard, some objections that, and again, going back to what I said earlier about, hey, barbecues predominantly, men,
Sure.
and we got big egos, and sometimes we get our feelings hurt. And I understand if I was a judge, I've never judged. So if I was a judge and somebody's saying, hey, we're going to have to use this scoring program, I might feel, a little attacked,
Hmm.
I might get a little defensive and say, wait a minute, so I get that, I get that part, and I think it's again, it creating and hopefully creating an environment where we can have this constructive dialogue, and the key word there is constructive, right? I mean,
Absolutely.
how can we move the football forward? And when I hear that things, were working great, and then they were done away with, and there was really no communication, there was really no explanation, that certainly, in my mind, raises an eyebrow, raises a red
Yeah.
flag. Hey, wait a minute. Where's the communication?
Yeah. So
And
what one of the things that happened was, and how long have you been around again? I'm sorry. So
less than a year. Our first comp
oh, okay.
was May 21 or
Okay.
22.
So we started developing the seating program in late 2017, 2018. So there was a change in the KCBS board. A couple of people that got on the board, and one was a rep, hated the seating program. So it was like their number one priority was to get rid of the seating program. And I believe in the first month, actually February, and I can't remember what year it was, but in February, and it was probably 19, in February of 2019, the board voted to get rid of the seating program. There was a pretty big uproar from the teams. The teams liked it. And a lot of the reps liked it as well. So they put it out to a vote to all of the KCBS membership, and it overwhelmingly won to reinstate the seating program. And they reinstated the seating program. And then, just sort of unceremoniously at the end of that season, they got rid of it again without any input from the membership at all. And it really did cause, I mean, for me, it was a little bit of an ego bruise, but I also understood the politics of it.
Mhm.
So, people said, "Oh, Gibbs doesn't know what he was doing," and I put some numbers in order and sat people down. I mean, your 9-year-old could do that while he's
Right.
while he's cooking kids Q. So, as far as any, and the Facebook post that started this all off, or at least got us to where we are today. There have been a ton of Facebook posts over the years, but the one that got us to where we are today, somebody had mentioned, one of the reps had mentioned something about animosity between judges and teams, and that this is just rekindling those flames. I have no animosity for judges at all. They come every week and do their job, and they're volunteers doing their job, but they choose to come and do it, so that's cool. But there's no animosity. I'm not saying that we should seat judges based on their average scores. I mean, as far as you can judge or you can't judge because of what your average score is. Come into the tent and judge, but based on some statistics, we're going to sit you accordingly. That you can't go and sit with your five best buddies every week, and that does happen. And while we say that there's a chip draw in place right now, I know for a fact that it doesn't happen in a lot of instances. The guys just come in and sit down wherever they want, and that's the chip draw. And that does not make for for a fair playing field. The first thing they say in the KCBS meeting when the rep talks, my name is blah blah blah, and I'm your rep, and my job is to make sure that you have a fair and balanced KCBS contest. Well, the first step of fairness is to have a fair playing field for judges.
That's right, especially if, if and again, I don't know if the policy is explicitly stated that it's a trip draw, but I've heard the same thing you have heard, that sometimes the chip draw happens and sometimes it doesn't,
Right.
and if it is a stated policy, I don't pretend to know all the, policies of that come down from the board whatsoever. That's just not my forte. But I think if it is, and that's not happening, then yes, that needs to be addressed. That needs to be talked about as to, okay, why is this not happening? Now, I also understand too, if I'm a judge, of course, I want to go sit with my buddies.
Sure.
I get it. I mean, I get
Yeah.
it. You know, but to your point, they choose to be there, just like we choose to be there.
Right.
Nobody's making us be there. So, but I think
But
it's interesting just to kind of work through and chat about the different, objections. And really, up to this point, I haven't really found any compelling objections that may make me say, well, I can kind of see how they may not want that program. I mean, I think certainly if you have some judges that don't show up last minute, I think possibly that might create some,
no,
you
the
know,
program actually had the spreadsheet actually had allowances in there for that. So there were spare judges,
mm,
and there were also contingencies put in place for suppose I go and I want to judge, and I get picked. I get picked to sit at table one, and my ex-wife gets to be at table one as well, right? Just because of our average scores, right? So we argue to death. We're not going to sit at the same table together. There were contingencies put in place to swap out like judges, and that was about the only human input that there was into that system.
wow, interesting.
Yeah, and the cool thing about it was over the course of all the contests that the seating program was used in, the difference between the uh, highest scoring table and the lowest scoring table was almost always one or less points. When you added up the average score of all six of those judges,
Mhm.
the highest table and lowest table was always 1 point or less. I've run some, and I've shown this to the board until I was blue in the face, and that's why I really don't fight the fight anymore. When you asked me to be on the program, I was a little bit hesitant to do it
Right.
because I just don't have any chips in the game, so to speak, anymore. I'm not competing a lot, and it's not my fight to fight anymore. But if you just set up a simple Excel spreadsheet and do a randomization of six judge tables with different scores, and just randomly seat them, the difference is sometimes as high as 6 or 7 points between one table and another, just based on a chip draw random deal. And
Right.
so that tells me that when I look at that setup, I can pick the angel table and the table of death before a box ever hits the judge's tent.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Now you mentioned too. I know before we started chatting, you mentioned you had a few different scenarios to run through,
Mhm.
and I want to be able to show that to our audience, and our listeners. Check out our YouTube channel. Obviously you won't be able to see it while you're driving around, but definitely check out our YouTube channel to be able to look at that. And let me see if I can just share this screen here, or get you to share your screen
Yep, I
rather.
got it right now. I think I'm going to be able to do it. So let's see what happens. There you go.
There we go. Okay.
So this is an actual contest. And if you see your name on here, you were a judge at this contest. Um, so all that would happen when a judge would come in, they the rep would put in their judge number into the system just as they came along. And what would happen is we'd go over here and hit the what was called the seat judges button. And when you put in the number, it would go look up the judge by name. And the judge could verify that it was him or her that was there. And if you notice here where it says last name, this particular week, if you see a star in Rangers or a star in Brewers, when I talked about the husband and wife that were arguing with each other and we switched them around, there
Mhm.
based on that average score, instead of putting their average score where everybody could see it, we just did a name representation uh, that represented their score range so that we could swap people around if we needed to. And that always worked really well. And we had a spot over here where we keep track of the table captains and any leftover judges. And if somebody bailed out at the last minute, we could just move them from over in this area over here and rerun the algorithm, and it would just reseat the judges. So when you hit that seat judges button, it would create a list of all the judges and what tables they needed to go sit at. And it also created a sheet that said table averages. And in this case, there were 5 tables at this contest. And these were the average scores of those 5 tables at that contest. And there was a high of a 195,861 and a low of a 195,3732. So less than a half a point difference
Right.
at before there was ever a box turned in. To me, that's a level playing field to start off with. As using the only real data point that we could use to seat judges, which was their average lifetime score.
Mhm.
And again, nowadays, I mean, we could sharpen that and move it down and say their last 10 or 15 contests if that's what we wanted to do. But it did also eliminate any disqualifications or anything that they had. So it didn't their scores weren't falsely set up. So one thing that I did do was I took this same contest. I just did this morning. Took this same contest and said, what happens if we did a chip draw? And I didn't manipulate this in any way. It could have come out with the same numbers as mine, and it would have been good or bad, and I would have accepted that. Because the numbers don't lie. I took those same judges, and in the first scenario, I lined them up, and the high table was a 197, and the low was a 193. So a difference of almost 4 points between the high table and low table. To me, that's sets up an automatic disadvantage for somebody that hits that low table out of the blocks. And I just ran it 4 times, and you could see every time that it was always in at least almost 3 in difference. So that's using the chip draw. So I still believe that my system trumps the chip draw system without a doubt.
And just to be clear, these two scenarios are from the same exact competition,
Same
same
pool of
exact,
judges.
same judges, everything.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
was there? I'm curious. I mean, you talked about the uproar in 2019,
Mhm.
and you talked about, okay, the overwhelming vote to reinstate the judge seating program, and then just kind of faded away, maybe under the table a bit towards the end of 2019. I mean, was there? And this was before my time. So
Right.
was there any communication? Was there any reason or explanation given?
No, and I really don't want to get into the politics of it.
Sure.
But there was politics behind it, and um, it just caught. I mean, and I know there was angst amongst the competitors when they went out the next season and said, "What happened to the seeding program?" But there was just no talk. Yeah, we're not using it anymore. We're going to try and develop something new in house. Okay. Well, that was fine, but we just realized that we had just taken 2 giant steps back. And
Right.
and my question, and I have to admit, I'm no longer. I let my KCBS membership lapse in March. Been a member since 2012, but the, we did take a vote as a membership, a special vote. It was an actual special vote, and the membership said we will use the seating program. And by the way, I don't make a dime. Didn't make a dime off the seating program. I put in. You can't imagine how much time building it, and keeping it up to date every month. Um, as a member, you just told me my vote doesn't count. It doesn't matter what you think, and that goes for the rest of the members. So one thing that I will say that's probably on the political side of things. KCBS has 16,000 members. Um, Out of those 16,000 members, probably 13,500 of them are judges, reps, organizers, and the other 2,500 are teams. And some of them cross. I was also a judge, so I was a judge and a team at the same time. But the unfortunately, KCBS is more of a judge centric organization than it is a cook team centric organization.
Right.
So they sort of get to drive the bus is the way that it works.
Right. And that's anytime you've got a big organization like a KCBS or any other organization, could be a private corporation, and you've got one segment of that organization that's overwhelmingly controlling it. You're going to have, it's unfortunate. I don't agree with it, but it happens. You're going to have the politics that you reference, and you're going to have, again, the egos, the
Mhm.
pride factor all coming into play. I just go back to, and I not to beat a dead horse here, but to
No,
reiterate and reemphasize that, again, if it's good for the longevity of the sport of competition barbecue, then it's good in my book. And
yeah,
looking at this objectively, is it the end all be all? Is it the
right.
solution to everything? Of course not.
No, of course not.
But does it move us forward? Does it,
Right.
you know, level the playing field? Because here's my concern. My concern is that as time goes on, more and more big teams, not just new teams, but big teams are going to start to get frustrated, start to get, a little upset, and perhaps just decide, I'm done. And
Well,
and I think
I know you interviewed Urkel Chila at Uncle Pigs. So, his resume speaks for itself as far as barbecue is concerned, right? So I got a call after the Apex contest. He called me on the way home. Or actually he went and did a second contest that weekend.
he did.
So he called me that evening. And he was like, "Dude, did you see what happened? Did you see that table of death? If you hit 650 in Apex, you were dead." And he said, "I lost by 2/100ths of a point." So I mean, this is a guy, and this is an important thing. There's guys out there that are cooking every week. Urkel is actually cooking 4 doubles in a row over the next 4 weeks. So he's cooking 4 double competition. I think he's into his third week now. He's hunting for the championship again.
Sure.
So 2/100ths of a point and a table of death cost him a GC. Doesn't take anything away from the team that won. No, nothing away from the team that won. I mean, they won fair and square with the rules the way that they were set. But they didn't hit that. They didn't hit table 650. I don't believe. So, and I could be wrong. I could be wrong. But that so guys that are in it every week, and we know how much this costs. Every competitor out there knows how much this costs. Uh, it, when you think I'm going out there for a crapshoot, well, you might as well go to the casino for the weekend
Right.
instead of coming out and cooking barbecue. You know?
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is fascinating stuff. I mean, again, it's clearly the numbers. You are a numbers guy, which is it's fascinating to me. I can't even begin to understand how to write a program like that, but I think it's pretty self-explanatory, and I'm glad you had the opportunity just to show it and show the comparison of the two.
Hmm.
Because again, I hope that folks watching this on our YouTube channel can see this, and it just again sparks that conversation. So as
Well,
we wind down,
I'm
go
sorry,
ahead.
but I'll also throw this in. It just sort of hit me from a few weeks ago. I'm also, and anybody that knows me, Luke Darnell, if you're watching, uh, I'm a bit of a tinfoil hat guy. I did the Ironman competition a couple weeks ago, which is a great competition. It was his last one that he's doing up in Greencastle, Pennsylvania. A competition. So just so you know, Kurt, this is a lot of fun for a seasoned barbecue guy. You're allowed to cook 7 pieces of chicken, 1 rack of ribs, 1 pork butt, and 1 brisket. Back in the old days, you weren't allowed to have sauce, and you weren't allowed to have any kind of kale in the box. You just flat out turned in straight up meat, and it was so much fun. But over the years, it sort of evolved, and now you can garnish and put sauce on. But when they handed out the awards, they were talking about, you know how it is. We're going to give out the awards, and when we're done, you can go see such and such if your team numbers 1 to 10, and such and such if your team numbers 20 to here or 10 to 20. And they said we're trying something new this week, something that KCBS is doing new this week. all you're going to get is your individual team tally sheet. You're not going to get the other sheets with all of the different categories on it and where everybody finished in those categories. So my tinfoil hat theory on that is KCBS knows that as soon as we all get those sheets, we look at our scores and we start ciphering to see what the table of death and the angel table are. And did we get screwed or didn't we get screwed? So now they say it's going to be uploaded to the web later and you'll be able to go see your total scores later on the web. I think that's their way of saying, yeah, we'll at least avoid this argument because people were doing box audits. They go back to the reps and say, hey, I want to see my boxes. I want to make sure that my actual box is the one that got judged because I think I got hosed on my score. I've never done a box audit, but I know guys that have. And I think this is KCBS's way of just sort of sweeping this under the rug a little bit to keep
Right.
guys from challenging. But
I found it interesting because you're right. It was just all of a sudden they no longer did it. I think the explanation we got was, well, we're trying to save paper,
go
which I
green,
didn't.
yes.
Yeah, I didn't think much of it, but it certainly does, make you raise an eyebrow considering the timing of it, and you know, candidly, I don't even begin to really understand the scoring system as in depth as you or as most of the competitors. Probably to my detriment. It's just I don't know. I like cooking barbecue, and I know
Absolutely.
when I turn in something good, and I know when I turn in something bad. And unfortunately, lately, it's been a lot of bad. So,
But you know what? Teams are getting better too.
right.
So over the years, I've had a couple of classes that I've taught. I've attended a boatload of classes. So if you can get into a class, it sure does help. And I know that Urkel's suffering from this a little bit, and Childs is suffering a little bit from this now. They've had classes, and I know they tell everybody because I know Urkel and I know Childs. They tell everybody what they do at a barbecue contest.
Mm.
Uh, and when they see teams that were in their class that maybe weren't doing as well before beat them at a contest, they're like, oh man, I shouldn't have had that class, And teams come over to you, and I've had it happen to me, and it actually is one of my happiest things in barbecue when I teach somebody how to cook a brisket, and they beat me, and they come up and say, "Oh man, you know what? I cooked your brisket the exact way you told me how to cook it, and I beat you." And I'm happy for them, happy for them.
Love that. And
Yeah,
that's what it's all about.
yeah.
And real quick, as we wind down, I want to make sure our listeners know how to connect with you. Again, we're chatting with Mark Gibbs. He's with Checkered Flag 500 Barbecue, based out of Fawn Grove, Pennsylvania. How can they connect with you? Facebook, Instagram?
Yeah,
Where can they
Facebook.
find you?
Yeah, we still have a Checkered Flag 500 Barbecue Facebook page out there. Don't update it like I used to. But if anybody wanted to message me or had any questions, they certainly could hit me there. And half of the barbecue world's Facebook friends with me, I think. So, always feel free to look me up on Facebook. Just Mark Gibbs on Facebook. And right now there's a picture of my old Silver Lab Sterling on there. So that's how you know me.
There you go, the Silver Lab Sterny. Well, this has been fascinating, and we appreciate your time and your willingness to come on the show and chat about this. So thanks again, Mark.
A lot of fun, Kurt. Thanks a lot for having me on.